Hi, good day, class. All right. Last video, we took a look at making a pseudocode for finding the circumference of a circle. And we talked about constants, which are variables where when the value is set, that value is not changed throughout the entire runtime of the pseudocode. So now we want to learn how to actually test our pseudocode, right? Testing a pseudocode just means to make sure that the pseudocode works correctly. So right now we have a pseudocode here for finding the sum of two numbers, right? Basically the same thing we did before in our first video. So how do we do this, right? Let's look at it. So the first thing we need to do is create something called a trace table. A trace table allows us to trace all the values of each of the variables at each step of the program. And at the ending of it, we should get back the value that shows that our problem is solved. Okay? So there's something that we need to understand about a trace table. With all trace tables, we need something known as test values for all user input. So for example, in this program here, we say read num1 and read num2. So therefore, num1 and num2 require user input. But since we need to test, in order to test this pseudocode, we need values, placeholder values to put inside of num1 and num2 when each of these lines are reached. So let's have our test values as 5. So our test values here will be 5 and 2. So therefore, we'll store 5 in num1 and we'll store 2 inside of num2. Right? Now, a trace table has a couple columns. There is a column for each variable, right? As well as a column that represents the line of code we are currently on. So in our pseudocode here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 lines of code, right? Or you could say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6 lines of code, right? So let's label this as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? So our pseudocode has 6 lines of code. So in order to keep track of each of these lines, as we go through our trace table, we need a column that is dedicated to each line, right? So let's insert a table here. And our table needs exactly 4 columns, right? Because remember, we need a column for each variable. So we have three variables, num1, num2, and sum. And we need to keep track of the values in each of those variables. So each of them need a dedicated column. We need a dedicated column for num1, dedicated column for num2, and need a dedicated column for sum as well, right? And one more column for each line of code. So that is 4 columns total. All right. So since we have 6 lines, we will say we'll need about 7. Right. Let's put here, right, insert an extra row right here. Insert it at this point. Insert an extra row right above. Okay. So our first column will be our code. Our second column will be for tracking the values in num1. Our third column will be tracking the values in num2. And our fourth column, we will track the values inside of num3. All right. So we have our code, our column to track the value of num1, track the value of num2, and track the value of, I said num3, but that's my bad, is actually sum, right? Because we have num1, num2, and sum. So during each line of code, we will see what is the value of this variable at that current line. So our first line of code is where we say begin. When we first start our program, there's nothing currently stored in any of our variables, right? When we initialize our variables here, we realize that not one of them have a value inside of them. So we put a dash in each of these variables, right? That basically means they are empty. In line 2 now, we are saying read num1. Now this is where we use our test values, right? Because read num1 is saying get input from the user and store it inside of num1. But since we are testing our program, we need to put in a test value, and our test value will be 5. So at line 2, where we say read num1 will now have the value 5 inside of it. Since we are currently still on line 2, right, and we have not yet read anything inside of num2 is still empty, and sum is still empty. Now we reach line 3. Every time we put a value inside of a variable, that value remains inside of that variable unless you change it otherwise, right? So num1 currently still has the value 5 inside of it because we did not remove the value inside of it in our pseudocode. Num2 now has the value 2 inside of it, right? Because at line 3, we're saying read num2, and our test value we're going to use is 2, so we insert 2 inside of num2. Sum, however, is still empty at line 3. We have now reached line 4. Line 4, we know that num1 still has the value 5. Nowhere in our pseudocode we change that value, so it still is 5. Num2 still has the value 2, and now on line 4, we say sum is equal to num1 plus num2. So sum now will contain the value 7. Then on line 5, where it says print 5, all of our values remain the same because we have not changed any of them. So num1 still has 5, num2 still has 2, and sum will still have the value 7 inside of it. Remember, we have another line, which is our ending. So line 6, we still have 5 inside of num1. When our program ends, we still have value 2 inside of it, and we still have the value 7 inside of sum, right? And since 5 plus 2 is 7, based on our trace table, we know that this program or this pseudocode here actually runs correctly. Right? So this is how we do our trace table. We create test values for each of the variables that require input. To see if a variable requires input, all you need to do is check your pseudocode to see where it says read and what variables come after that. So depending on the variable comes after that, that means that variable is receiving user input and needs a test value in order to do a trace table. All right. Remember, your first column should represent the lines of code, and all of the other columns represents each variable inside of your pseudocode. All right.